right, well, good. Yeah. I think it's, yes, it's still good morning. Pleasure to be here with everybody this morning. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
And for making this time of investing your time into something that I consider pretty important. That's the title insurance piece of the real estate transaction. So my name is Dave Nichols. If we haven't had the pleasure to meet, I'm the Western Michigan Division Manager with Lighthouse. I'm a Lighthouse Title. I'm president of America's One Title Agency, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Lighthouse now. I started that company in 2006. And then in April of 2023, I hitched my wagon, merged our organization into the Lighthouse family of companies, and that's why I kind of have two different roles that I fill, but are slowly becoming funneled into one over time as we continue our assimilation into the Lighthouse family of companies. So I have been in the business a little over 30 years, have 2 adult kids, spent almost my whole career in the workforce in the title insurance business. Prior to that, interestingly enough, considering what you guys are working on today, I was in the sewing and crafts industry for about 5 years. You can laugh. You can laugh. So while I was getting my degree in college, I fell into a job. The company still exists. It's over on Cottage Grove in downtown Grand Rapids called Notions Marketing. And if you are ever if you're a crafter, and you know what notions are, right? If you're ever in that section of Meyer, there's still a corporate account. That was one of our accounts back then. If you look behind like the threads or the needles or whatever, you'll see a little planogram label. They still use them today. Of course, it's a lot more computerized, and it'll say Notions Marketing on it. I check it almost every time I'm in there. I'm like, are they still doing that? Sure enough, they're there. So I worked for that company for a number of years. Got out of there though, got into the title business, and that's really where I've spent the majority of my career. So, you know, if there's time, I'll do a bag or two. Hey, I like to craft. So, what I'm here doing today, so this is not CE class or credit, but it is just an opportunity for us to kind of dig in. Dan and Sue and I were talking about opportunities for us to connect, to help train some agents. And so I thought a great place to begin would be just kind of going through the commitment. So we're going old school. Everybody should have a copy of a physical piece of paper in front of you. At least have a pen, because there's going to be some things that I'll have you write down as we go through. If you have a highlighter, that's even better. Because what I want to do today is get you more comfortable, a little more familiar and more comfortable with the commitment and the things that you should really be paying attention to, and maybe some things that are important but maybe not as significant for you and for your clients. And then we can take some questions and answers as well. Has anyone never seen a title commitment? Okay, so we've got some people at both ends of the spectrum. Fabulous. Okay? So ask a question. If I say something that you don't understand, if I use a term, it's not I've been at this for 30 years. I'm going to try to simplify as much as I can, but if you know, feel free to interrupt me and ask a question if you're like, wait a minute, right? I want this to make sense for everybody on some level, okay? Also, what's maybe even more important is pizza's coming in about 15, 20 minutes. So when that's, well, Betsy from our West Shore office will be bringing that in, and I would imagine probably just spread it around rather than take a straight up break that soon into our time together, but this is something definitely where you can kind of munch and learn at the lunch and learn, okay? Yeah. All right.
Gracias.
So let's take a look at the commitment. What you have in front of you is Schedule A. It's actually the meat of the commitment. And when you get your first commitment, or you've seen a commitment before, it's going to have a sandwich. Think of it like a sandwich, and this is the meat in the middle. And it's also going to have a front portion of it, which is going to have an invoice on it. It's going to have what's called a commitment jacket. And it's just standard information that goes along with every commitment. It's going to look very similar. It's going to look exactly the same on a Lighthouse commitment. It's going to look very similar from any other competitor's title commitment. So that's kind of the top of the sandwich. Behind Schedule A, you'll have Schedule B1 and B2. That's some more meat in the sandwich. Right? Then you'll have what we call the back part of the commitment, which is the back part of the jacket, and those are like the 2 pieces of bread. But the only thing I've given you today is Schedule A, because that's really what we're going to focus in on. So when you get your first commitment, or when you get a commitment, you can flip past the invoice, flip past the beginning of the first part of the jacket, and get right into Schedule A. And I want to look at, if you look at the, right below Schedule A, well, above Schedule A, you'll see some identifying features, right? That should line up with your property address for your purchase agreement, right? This is going to be on the deal that you're talking, that's in question at that particular time. This one happens to be 123 Test Avenue in Manistee, Michigan, right? So you'd hope to see your property address there that you've got that you've got your purchase agreement on. Below that, Schedule A, you'll see the commitment date, okay? And you know what, let me just jump up right below the property address. Does everyone see revision number? So throughout the process, just like you guys might have addendums to your purchase agreement, there might be new information that comes to light. And so occasionally there'll be a secondary commitment that you get, and it'll have a revision 1, revision 2. You'll want to always be utilizing and be mindful of which revision you're looking at, so that you're looking at the most current information. Make sense?
So if I can jump in, if you're using dot loop, which you should be, you're dragging and dropping your title insurance in. When you get the revision, drag and drop that on top of the previous title policy. So you're always, your most current one is the one that you pull up when you open that loop.
Great. That's awesome. Okay. So the first thing that will also tell you what you're looking at in terms of the recent data will be the commitment date. And the commitment date in this case is May 10, 2022. Now something that you'll want to get comfortable with, the effective date or the commitment date in this commitment or in any commitment is going to always trail the real date. And the reason is because it's a date that we're showing that is effective with the Register of Deeds or with the particular database that we're looking at, right? So imagine just for a moment, days are happening, weeks go by, months go by, deals happen all the time. Stuff gets recorded, liens get recorded, mortgages get recorded at the Register of Deeds, and all that stuff is chronological, right, by property. When we're searching properties, it takes time from the time a document is actually executed to the time it gets to the public records. So there's that window or gap period of time. So our certification date is that date, May 10th in this case, backwards. So if this were a real live commitment, not a fake one that we were looking at, and today is, what is today, October 7th, right? You might see it would be completely normal for you to see a commitment date that might say September 28th or something like that, or September 15th, or even a month or 2 months sometimes behind in more rural counties, okay? And that's okay, because in title insurance, when we close your transactions, there is gap coverage that's included in the commitment, right? But you always want to get it as close as possible. So that's the commitment date. That means that's the date that the information is relevant through that we're going to be looking at inside this commitment. There are only 2 policies that we ever sell in our world working with realtors. An owner's policy, which you'll see there, has a little check mark by A, and a loan policy, which is the check mark B there. And you'll see the proposed insured as well as the proposed amounts. There's only 2 products and services that we deal with, or 2 products that we deal with. The service that we encounter each one another at all the time is at closings, right? So that's the service side of our business. The only products we're really ever going to sell to you and to your clients in this case are going to be owner's policies, and they'll purchase, and if they're a buyer, they'll purchase a loan policy for their lender. Okay, so the Alta owner's policy, you'll see a proposed policy amount of $1 million. Make a little note or a highlight by $1 million. That's your sales price. Okay, so if you look at your commitment and you know your sales price is $1.2 million or $750,000, right? That's something that should match your sales price. And so that means, hey, something's amiss here. Maybe there's an addendum that the title company is missing. Okay, just make that connection. But the owner's policy is always going to be in the amount of the sales price. And you'll see the proposed insured. That's going to be the buyer in your transaction. Whether that's your client or the other side of the deal, that's going to be the buyer. Okay, in this case it happens to be Bert and Ernie, married individuals I'm sorry to shatter any childhood pictures that you may or may not have had. I did not make this commitment. We live in a world that allows
Did
that.
sleep in the same bed.
So, I have no comments, no further comments on that. But it is, that is your buyer, right? That's the sales price. The loan policy, proposed insured, okay? That should be the lender. Again, maybe you're on the buyer side and you might know that, or maybe you're learning that from your sales commitment if you're on, or from your commitment if you're on the seller side. And the proposed policy amount of the loan policy, anybody want to guess what that number equates to in your transaction? The loan amount, right? Exactly, exactly. Okay? All right. Number 3 will never change, but the last 2 words, fee simple, right? That's almost never going to change in your environment with how you interface with the title insurance company. And that's the insured position that we're taking for the owners. We're insuring their fee simple interest. And fee simple is a legal term that we get from our legal friends, right? They've come up with that, and that's a legal way in which they will hold title. There are certain rights associated with that, and that's as far as I'm going to go for that one. But that will always remain the same. And then number 4, you'll see the title is at the commitment date. So as of the commitment date, the title is vested in, okay? And that, whatever appears in that space, does anybody want to guess what that represents in your transaction?
The current owner.
The current owner, or the seller, right? So here's something that's really important for you to make a note by that section. If that's not my seller, I'm going to suggest for the moment that you're on the seller's side, right? You're working for the seller. If that's not your seller, and you didn't know that, you'd never seen that name or that entity or anything like that before, right? That's a major red flag where we need to dig deeper into the commitment to see what requirements are necessary. Or you might have learned at this very moment, wait a minute, oh my gosh, it's in my seller's business, or it's in my seller's trust, or I don't know that name at all. I need to call my seller. Who's John Smith, Mary Jones? Oh, right? And get the rest of the story. Because we're just reporting as a title entity at this point in the transaction, whatever the title records are as that effective date. And there can be a ton of different reasons as to what that name might mean or why it's different. Maybe a deed was missed. Maybe it was misposted in the records. Maybe it was never recorded. Maybe, right? Maybe. There's all kinds of reasons. But that's definitely something you as a realtor would probably be one of the first people in the transaction to go, something doesn't add up here. So number 4 would be the seller.
Excuse me. If
Questions?
there is a quick claim deed and it's not recorded, and then when we check the title work and we see the different owner's name on it, then will that quick claim deed legal or?
Yes. If you have a fully executed deed that's not recorded, yes, it still affects title. It's just not made a public record yet. So it's a reliable instrument. As long as it's properly executed, even though it's not recorded, we can rely on it, or it can be relied upon. The problem though is that no one knows it's there.
Right.
And so let's stick with that example. Could everyone hear her question? Okay, if she asked a great question, and she's already jumped right into this, hey, that's not my seller, but I know that a quitclaim deed exists from this person to my seller. Her question was, is that a good deed? And the short answer is yes, but how's anybody going to know about it, right? So in our commitment, if this were really the case, we would, and I'll show you on schedule, on the requirement schedule B1 here in a minute, there would be a requirement for a deed to get from the seller, or excuse me, from the vested owner to our new seller. You'd see that on there. And if you saw that requirement and you already had the deed, then you would want to reach out to your title professional right away and say, hey, I just want you to know, I have this unrecorded quitclaim deed and whatever, and then a conversation would ensue. Get us the deed, let's take a look at it, make sure it's reliable, make sure it's recordable, and we would modify, at that point, we might modify the title commitment to reflect, instead of getting this deed, we might say, record the deed of a copy of the deed has been provided to the title company, record the deed at closing or something like that. But that's a wonderful question.
Could you elaborate on what happens if maybe that person bought it on a land contract?
Okay, great question. So Sue asked about a land contract, which in that situation, if you're selling a property and your seller, let's say, is Mary Smith, and you get this commitment and it's in the estate of Oscar T. Grouch, right? What's going on? And Sue asked, well, what happens if there's a land contract, right? So in the case of a land contract, we would be requiring a warranty deed in fulfillment of that land contract, the presumption of which would have been, let's say, 10 or 15 years earlier, right? They would have entered into a land contract, and they would have they hopefully would have some documentation that was either recorded, at the very least in their possession, that referenced that, and then we would require a deed in fulfillment of that land contract, or simultaneous with payoff, or maybe it's paid off already and they just never got a deed. There could be lots of explanations as to why that never happened. In fact, that's pretty plausible. Would you agree, Sue?
Oh my God.
The number of land contracts that happen, get paid off in 15 or 20 years, then another 15 years goes by. Oh, I didn't realize, I forgot I had to get the deed for that, right? But that's where you'd work with your title company. We would put those pieces of the puzzle together, and we would discover, okay, where do we need to go from here? What do we need to do to clear up the title? Where is that old seller, right? When was your last payment? That type of a thing. Now, in the case of it, if it was still a live contract and they were still making payments, but they decided they were going to sell it, that's certainly plausible too, and we would work together with them on that warranty deed and fulfillment of the land contract, but then they would also be a payoff of the seller's portion of the seller's proceeds.
So let's say you get a sheriff's deed, and then you get a quitclaim deed after that. Does that give you full, ability to sell the property?
It would depend on the redemption period that came along with the sheriff's deed. So when a sheriff's deed is given and recorded, there is generally a 6-month redemption period, at which point, or during which point, the underlying seller or the debtor who lost his or her property would have the right to redeem during that period of time. And those are very important and protected rights in our state. And so it's very difficult to speed that process up. There are a couple of legal maneuvers, but those are highly scrutinized by both our friends on the law side of things, the attorneys on the law side of the discussion, as well as the underwriters on the title side of the discussion. Because shortening those rights or infringing upon them in any way, it adds a significant amount of risk to a transaction. So the most popular way that would shorten that, without getting too far in the weeds, the most popular way that I've seen in my experience is through an abandonment affidavit, and that's highly scrutinized because that effectively squeezes that redemption period down. And again, we don't want to be in the business of shortchanging any owner of their right to redeem the property. Can't even imagine being in that situation. I'm sure all of us can have some level of compassion with what they might be going through at that time, and so the last thing we would want to be doing is cutting that unlawfully short. So the quitclaim deed doesn't really do much until after the redemption period. Good question. Okay, so number 5, the land described is as follows. In this case, on number 5, it's an attachment on Schedule C, but that is going to be the legal description of the property. So it could be a very simple legal description, like Unit 6 of Dave and Susan's addition to the City of Grand Rapids, or Lot 6, Dave and Susan's addition to the City of Grand Rapids, or it could be a really long, lengthy what we call a meets and bounds description, where it's a long legal description talking about feet and degrees and directions and that kind of thing. That legal description will, if it's short enough, it'll appear there. Many times it's longer, and so it appears on an attachment. Okay? But that would be the legal description. Nothing really for you as a realtor to dig into. You don't need to become experts in legal descriptions. But if it's a simple legal description and you have a tax bill, right, it's probably a prudent move to make sure that the tax bill is lot 7 and the legal description is lot 7, right? Because we only know what we only know what we're dealing with, in terms of that. Make sure that's consistent in the purchase agreement. But that wouldn't be a lot for you to look at there. If you flip over to Schedule B1 and B2, that's page 2 of the handout that I gave you. You'll see at the very top, Schedule B Part 1 requirements. Just maybe make a little highlight or circle requirements or note that. As a realtor, these are the requirements that we're making as a title insurer in order to close and insure the transaction. And we all want this deal to close, right? We all have an interest in making sure this gets closed because, I don't know, we like to get paid. Anybody here like to get paid, right? So none of that happens, right, until we close. So this is sort of the to-do list as a realtor. When you get this is kind of the first, like looking at those things on the first page, right? Double checking a couple of those things. But this is what our closers are looking at, and this is what I would suggest you take a look at as well. And together, between your understanding of the transaction and your closer's understanding of the closing process, if we're both reading this document together, not literally together, but we're both concerned about that particular document, we're both going to be identifying the things that have to happen or the documents that are necessary in order to get this deal closed efficiently and as efficiently as possible. Now, I'll make a quick note. What you'll notice after you've looked at 1, 2, 10, 15 commitments, you're going to notice that many times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of this list are very, very similar, if not exact, right? Because there's a commitment format that's being utilized by virtually every title company. And interestingly enough, and maybe you'll find this interesting, the actual commitment format with the schedules of A and B and the numbering system is actually a published document that is essentially encouraged to be utilized amongst all title agencies, regardless of brand, so that there can be some consistency amongst reviewing them, right? Because it'd be really confusing. Not that they all look exactly the same, but you'll notice this format, or you should notice this format, regardless of wherever you end up closing or whatever commitment you're looking at. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in this case, even 7, with regards to Lighthouse, are going to look very, very much the same, if not exactly the same every time. And we won't spend a lot of time on those, but you'll find that there are things like, hey, these are the things in the commitment that have to be met in order for us to insure. Premiums have to be paid in order for the policy to be issued. Taxes and assessments. Those are things that are a part of every real estate transaction. They have to be brought current or paid, right? So you'll see all that kind of stuff, some kind of legalese sorts of things included in this as well. But it's all going to be relatively kind of like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, duh. Obviously, we got to pay for these services in order for them to happen. But then when you start, in this case, on this commitment, you'll start seeing maybe 7, 8, 9 in your commitments. You'll start to notice things that are going to be unique to this property only. And that's, as a realtor, that's really where you start providing a high degree of service and expertise to your client. Because you're reviewing this, right? My staff is reviewing this, and we're saying, hey, I'm going to read from number 9 just for a moment. Prior to closing, furnish to the company a recordable copy of the judgment of divorce in the matter of Piggy Lee Frog and Kermit the Frog. Oh no, right? So we have, that tells us, right, as realtors, okay, so we've got an issue here that's happening, and maybe you knew about it as a realtor, maybe you didn't, but we've identified something in the public records that has disclosed to us that there's a divorce, and when there's a divorce, there's usually a settlement, and many, many times there's real estate involved. In most cases, or in many cases, the marital home. And in the divorce judgment is what tells us what happened to that. If the public records haven't already dealt with that effectively, then we've got to look into that as a title insurer. And so, as a realtor, you can look at that and kind of get out ahead of that and go, okay, so yes, I knew this unfortunate thing was happening, or I didn't realize my clients were in the middle of a divorce, right? And so we can work together, title company and realtor, to find out exactly what we need to have happen there. Number 10, and by the way, I want to mention right up front, this commitment is full of problems. Not every commitment is going to be this jam-packed, full of title requirements or title issues, but we've included a lot in here so we can talk about these situations. So number 10, furnish to the company a recordable release, of a lien recited in the judgment of divorce. Okay, so maybe this divorce is final, and it's been identified that there might be a split of the property, or maybe one party gets the property according to the judgment of divorce, but the other party receives a lien and maybe a monetary amount that goes along or commensurate with that, right? So this is talking still similarly about the judgment of divorce, but now we've got to deal with someone's interest in the property and making sure that they release it and get it paid properly. Number 11, record a certificate or a certified copy of a death certificate for Oscar Grouch. Oh no, Oscar has gone on before us, right? So looks like we've got what this would tell you, if you see a death certificate, you must have seen a death certificate already in their commitments. Pretty popular. So interesting fact, in Michigan, there's really only a few things that transfer title. What do you think those, anybody want to hazard a guess? What are the instruments that legally transfer title?
Well, it has to be a death certificate.
Sometimes it's a death certificate. A will doesn't transfer title. A will gives information about how maybe transfer should have been title should have been transferred. But a death certificate transfer is a legal instrument that can eliminate an interest in title. Not quite transfer, but eliminate. A warranty deed or a quitclaim deed can transfer title. Anybody have a guess at what the third legal instrument is? Hint is legal.
Court order.
Court order. Yeah. If a gavel falls and a judgment's recorded and the judge says, Dave and Susan own this property, that's, in our world, pretty much as good as a warranty deed. Okay? So in this case, we have Oscar is in the past title, and he's got an interest in the property, but he's deceased. So the only way we can get rid of his interest, right, because he can't sign a deed, is to get a death certificate. Okay? So still talking about requirements. I would guess that most of our commitments are going to have one page of requirements. In this case, again, remember this is a jam-packed with things for us to talk and learn about. Before I leave that though, any questions on some of those first things that we talked about? Divorce judgments, liens, death certificates. Yes.
Number 7, about the marijuana. So it says that if you know that there is something related to marijuana transaction involving land, then the title company will not insure that property.
Right. So this particular underwriter happens to disallow us as an agent to close a property that sells, distributes, or cultivates marijuana. If you have
a license?
What?
Even if they have a license?
Right. So the underwriters have decided that the issue of marijuana is not settled enough in our culture or at the federal level to ensure that. So if you have something like that, if you have a property that involves any of those things, that's something you're going to want to talk to us ahead of time about, and we're going to need to choose a different underwriter. If you'll notice at the very top left, this one says First American on it. Lighthouse and all of our affiliates, including West Shore, have between 5 to 7, depending on the brand, 5 to 7 different underwriters, which we can utilize. And there are some underwriters that will allow real estate closings involving this type of activity. Great question.
Dave, I wanted to mention that if you're dealing with divorces, a lot of times the attorney involved will get a quitclaim and never record it and keep it in their files. And I've run into that a couple of times where we have to go back to the original divorce attorney to get a quitclaim resurrected. So, just FYI, it happens.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes they're handed out. Deeds are prepared by attorneys, they're executed in the attorney's office, and they're handed to people right? So that kind of stuff does happen. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Have you ever seen it where there maybe it wasn't recorded by an attorney maybe, or it's not in an attorney's hands, but if someone has a criminal record and they're in jail and they're not kind of like helping the person that's still on that deed, they're not cooperating for like a sale of a house or anything like that, and they're not leaving jail anytime soon? Have you seen that happen or no?
Not specifically. We have seen where people with interest in title are incarcerated,
Okay.
and if we can, depending on where they're located, if we can gain access to them in some appropriate and safe manner, they can sign, and if they're willing, they can sign documents. As long as like a deed would have to be notarized, of course. So as long as that was part of the process, sometimes some jails and prisons have those people on hand that have notaries. Other times, if it's like a Kent County jail, which is a little bit less secure, sometimes they'll allow notaries to go in.
So if
with
they're not
supervision.
willing, it still would have to go through the legal process again?
Yeah, if they're not willing to, then there would have to be some sort of legal maneuver or angle to address their interest in the property.
Okay.
Do you think there would be some type of law that would, like basically forfeit people that are incarcerated to any type of possession over a deed or anything like that?
I'm not aware of simply incarceration limiting their right there, but yeah, I don't know if I suppose that could possibly happen, or there could be something I'm unaware of, but I've never seen that before. Unless it's a court order, right?
Right.
And so, like I'm thinking like an eviction or the affidavit of abandonment that we talked about earlier. Those would be legal maneuvers where the courts could step in and relinquish someone of his or her title.
Just a little more clarity on section 7 with marijuana. Sorry, I'm Southern Michigan. People are growing weed all over the place over there. Is this if the property is like currently being used for, or is it like if someone had it in?
It's a current use.
Okay, so if it's currently being used, but if it, okay,
Yeah.
if it was used but is not anymore, then
Yeah, that
that's
would just
good.
be noted,
Okay.
and it would probably, any underwriter would probably be
Yeah.
fine with that.
You just can't sell all that stuff on the property.
Right,
You can't
right.
share it.
In this particular underwriter, in this particular case, says we're really not comfortable insuring any of that stuff yet because the issue hasn't been settled to their satisfaction at the federal level. But there are underwriters who are willing to deal with it when it's current. Now, to your point, if this used to be, if it's a series of pole barns that were used as a grow space, and the equipment's gone, the activity's not conducted there anymore, and it's being sold to a storage developer,
Or
right?
whatever.
Yeah, that could be that'd probably be a deal that this particular underwriter could be sold on.
So it'd only be if something's active there and they're selling it to someone.
Yeah, that's
That wants to
specifically what
maintain
7
it.
is
Okay.
for. Yeah,
Just making sure.
good question. Others? Okay. So still on the requirement side, again, as realtors, this is our list of things that we're really digging through. We want to take special note of, maybe assist the title company in, or they might ask your assistance in, or you guys might talk with our closers like, hey, are you getting this death certificate? Or I call my client, they don't have it, right? So these are things that as realtors that you're going to want to continue to take a look at, still under the requirements section. Number 12, so institute proper probate proceedings for the administration of the estate of Oscar T. Grouch deceased, and for the appointment of a fiduciary to convey the subject property pursuant or according to Michigan law. So anybody want to take a guess at what's happening here? It's a a lot of fancy words there. What are we getting at?
He didn't have a will.
He got everything.
He didn't have a
Right,
will.
he's gone. We know Oscar's gone, because it tells us that. And so now his estate owns it. So typically what happens when someone passes away, and even in the case of a will, if there's no trust or there's no one else in title with them, the only way is through probate. I should say, not the only way, but the most practical and efficient way is through probate. And probate scares a lot of people, but if it is a court action, and it does cost a little money, if you wanna try to exercise that, open probate yourself, you can do it through the clerk's office. You don't have to have an attorney, but I would always suggest getting one. It's money well spent, and it will lead your client through a process that they're likely not gonna do very often, and it'll be a lot more efficient. However, it is an actual court action where something similar like a suit is open at the court, and essentially what's happening is your client, let's just say, is petitioning the court. Let's just say it's the son or daughter of Oscar Grouch here, and they're ready to sell the property, and they've hired you, and they're looking for authority to sign up a deed, basically to sell that property. And the state, probate is the way the state essentially instills that authority into somebody who doesn't own the property. So we're looking for somebody to open probate for the administration of this estate, and we want them appointed a fiduciary. And a fiduciary is just a legal term for someone who's acting on someone else's behalf. Is probably a simple way of doing that. And a lot of times, the court will open up probate, or your attorney will have the court open up probate, and they'll say, we want Sally, Oscar's daughter Sally, who's your client, to be the independent personal representative, and she's seeking control. And so the court will do a little bit of due diligence, make sure there's no infighting, if there's other heirs to the property. If Mr. Grouch had 3 or 4 more people, they might take affidavits from those 3 or 4 people, because, you know, it's unfortunate, but sometimes there is a little bit of wrangling after someone passes over who's in control or what someone's going to get or not get. That's just sometimes par for the course. But if it's not contested, or if there's limited contest to that, then it's a pretty straightforward, relatively efficient process where your client, hypothetically, in this case, Sally Grouch, is going to become appointed independent personal rep or given some sort of fiduciary capacity to act on behalf of the state. And that's really, as a realtor, that's really what you're going after. Because if you see your property is in an estate, the first thing you're going to want to get your arms around is, do we have the proper authority? Does who I'm working with have the proper authority to deal with the estate and be able to sign a deed on behalf of the estate? And then where does the money go, right? So those are the types of things that title companies are going to be looking at. And so to the extent that you understand that, it'll be that much faster and more efficient for you and for your clients. Question on how that works, or any more specific questions relative to that? Number 12. Is anyone engaged, ever have a client ever in probate? You've done it recently?
Just closed one.
Just closed one. Yep. Do you remember the documents that you got from the court for the title company?
Yes, they first had was an accident, the brother was killed in a car accident, and no will. The family was estranged for 10 years, never saw the brother, didn't know anything about the house, but then they got right away the judge issued that the brother and the sister would both be equal
Great. Okay.
parties in it, and then they hired an attorney. So once the judge issued that letter, they could go ahead and list the house and sell it, which we did. Then that money went into, I think it was the estate of, and it's still in there now. They're waiting for the judge to order the release of because they have a certain amount of time to sell everything.
Yeah.
Like everything monetary, worth money, like cars that have anything traceable.
Yep.
Guns.
Yeah.
The cars, any vehicle with a title, and then all that money sits there until the judge is satisfied. But there is a time limit.
Yeah. So there's two.
Yeah.
Usually, in our experience, we find there's 2 types of authority that's granted. And in that case, you brought up a really good point. Sometimes it's given to more than one person. That can be totally
It was
appropriate.
and, not or.
Yeah.
It was and.
So two
The
names
brother
need to go out.
and the sister, not
Right.
either or, so it was both of them.
And the document that's usually provided from the court that we'll be asking for is something called letters of authority.
That's what it was, yeah, letters of authority for Mr. and Mrs. brother and sister
Yeah.
equally, yeah.
Cool, yeah, so, very good, so firsthand
Yeah.
experience with dealing with that. And the letter of authority is what the title company utilizes to rely upon, and you, and everyone involved in the transaction, rely on that authority so that we can ensure that deed transfer from the seller to the buyer. So very important, yeah, letters of authority is that.
And they have to be the original documents, cause
It's-
I presented to the closer the original death certificate and the original letters of authority.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here, very good, great, real world practice. Great, okay, and then number 13. This is a big one, but it's really not that. Hey, is our food here?
Yeah.
Okay, did you set it up in the kitchen? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were gonna bring it in or set it up there. So how would you like to proceed? You wanna?
Do you guys wanna take a quick break? We'll grab our food and come back in
And bring back
there?
in and eat?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead and keep cruising along. You keep eating. Feel free to ask questions with your mouth full. You don't offend me. So we're working through Schedule A. We got through half of Schedule B, Part 1. And we left off at 13, which in your packet, I think is the 3rd page. So we're working through the requirements, and just to kind of bring us all back here, again, this is the to-do list. This is the items that our staff is going to be zeroing in on, and as you dig into this this part of the commitment too, this is really where you can get out ahead of some of these things, demonstrate your expertise on these matters to your clients. Feel free to utilize our staff, ask questions if you need clarity, because they're going to be reaching out to you. Even in the event you don't reach out to them, they're going to be reaching out to you looking for these solutions to each one of these items. And also for the sake of my team in the back, this commitment is full of every nasty thing you could possibly imagine. And most deals don't have every bad thing in them, right? Or every challenging item.
Oscar's dead, Peggy and Kermit are getting divorced.
No, it's not that hard, it's pretty easy, and then I go, oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, so we've got, so number 13, we're talking, number 13 is dealing with a new topic, furnish and record a certificate of trust for Elmo Monster Trust in the form of an affidavit, dated and executed, and then I'm gonna stop reading there because as you let your eyes glance over the next sentence, you're gonna see a lot of standard language. I'm gonna stop there because when you see a requirement for a certificate of trust, once you see certificate of trust, for the sake of this is not about creating a bunch of realtor title experts, but making you smart enough to know what you need to know, right? The rest of this stuff that you see under this requirement is really just statutory language that must be in the document that we're looking for. But here's a little secret. First of all, my staff knows exactly what needs to be there and can address those questions if they come up between you and your clients, number one. But number two, most attorneys who prepare these documents are going to know exactly what's required in them, and they're going to be acceptable most of the time. Again, we're talking about kind of that 85% of the time, right? And if it is missing something, or it isn't recordable, or it's too old, or something like that, our staff can make you aware of that as well. So in our training, we're not going to obsess about numbers 1 or 2 or A through G, because those are specific things that will automatically occur in the commitment. And simply by asking for a recordable certificate of trust, full stop, 9 times out of 10 we're going to get what we need, right? Or we're going to know what we have is not adequate. At which point our staff can help you engage, and we can get to working together. So I want to talk more about the purpose behind it and what it accomplishes, rather than the form of the document. Fair enough? So, certificate of trust. Anybody bumped into this in real life? Okay. Certificates of trust tell us a couple of things right away. Now I'm gonna. What's that?
I just closed one of those too.
Oh, good. Hey,
Yeah.
you got some real life examples here. So, where we started on Schedule A, if, you'll know you're gonna need a certificate of trust if your current seller is in a trust, right? If it's in the name of Oscar T. Grouch Trust or XYZ Family Trust, right? That's gonna be something you can pretty much gear into as a professional realtor. Oh, it's in a trust, we're gonna need a certificate of trust. Now, what's the certificate of trust do for us? Like, why does the title company wanna see it? Does anybody have any idea as to why that might be?
Shows authority to who can sell the property.
Very good, very good. Just like the letter of authority does, right? It's very similar in its purpose. They're a totally different document, right? But very similar in its purpose. Because as a title company and as the realtor, you know, we're part of this transaction. You're facilitating your client's needs. We're dealing with the insurability and the legal transfer of this. So we need to know that whoever signs and that warranty deed that we're insuring, that it's legit, right? So in the case of a certificate of trust, authority, or a trust, the authority is established by the certificate of trust. So that's why it's important and why we need it. The form, which is what our commitment restates to us, is really not something that you guys are going to be determining, right? We're going to let the attorneys do that, or we're going to let our staff determine whether or not it's recordable or not. And we may engage you in that. You may provide, and this happens a lot. So I want to just be fully transparent about that. Your client might be like, oh yeah, we know it's in the trust, and we're going to give you a certificate of trust. And then they give you a certificate of trust that's 8 years old. Now, that's not acceptable. Why would that not be acceptable to you as a realtor or to me as a title guy?
Because things change, people die,
Yeah, right?
they just have that.
Exactly. Does that make sense to everybody?
There has to be amendments.
It's
or
not us.
whatever.
It's not the fact that title companies, they're these immovable, unfriendly, cold entities, right? It's because we got to establish that it's legit, that the transfer really works, and that it's insurable, and that it makes sense. And the last thing you or me want is for this transaction to unwind because some level of authority wasn't done properly or accounted for properly. So we work together on that. Yeah.
How current does a certificate of trust need to be for you guys to accept it?
Dance party. KG, did you hear that?
Yeah, it's
What's a good answer?
Needs to be 12 months or newer. So it can't be more than a year old typically.
Can't be more than a year old, okay?
Yeah, and if you know there's been changes, like somebody's died, or a trustee has changed, or even a successor trustee has changed, then we use certificate of trust.
Mine had both of that.
Yeah, you had both of
That
them.
had, because
They
the
had
sister
died.
was, and then she was in a nursing home now. Well, the dad died, but the sister was first, then the old man died, and then so there was two things, but
Yeah.
she's no longer competent, so that was the brother that,
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
well, it was easy, I mean, he complained because he thought he was gonna have to pay his attorney $500 to amend it, I said, I don't think so.
Right.
Then he calmed down.
I will say one thing, if like they have an issue with the cost, like paying it up front, sometimes the attorneys will just email us invoices and we can pay it
Yeah.
at close.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
if you have a client who's kind of prickly, I guess, about paying it out of pocket, you can always be like, we can put it in your closing
Right.
costs. Thank you.
But that attorney got it right over.
Yeah.
Great.
Like within 24 hours.
Great. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was good, yeah.
Yeah. And typically, and I'll say this with a big grain of salt. Typically, this is not a big deal, but sometimes it's the uncertainty of it that our sellers have, or they get frustrated because 10 years ago when they did their trust and they have this big book from their attorney and there's 3 certificates of trust in it. They're like, here, it's old, right? And there's a level of disappointment and frustration. Like, I already did this is fine. And so it's helpful for everybody in the process to understand, well, but things can change. It's been 10 years, and we can all relate if you've ever done your own trust. It's not like something you get out and read every year, right? Let alone 5 years, right? So it can happen to anybody. And so that's just really good for you guys to understand a little bit more of the why back there. Not whether or not it's, just the date really is the one thing the only thing you need to really be mindful of. And that's something that we can get out ahead of. Thanks KG for bringing up the fact that you can pay for them at closing. Yeah, that's a great idea, because sometimes people do get a little funny about that, because it can be, depending on the attorney. I mean, it's really, between all of us, it's a pretty simple, straightforward thing that probably their paralegal preps, but sometimes they'll charge a chunk for it, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll offer it as a service, others won't. So it's gonna be, you just don't know until you get into the process a little bit, okay? One other thing I wanna mention about certificates of trust and trusts generally. Just recently, and it seems like this runs in cycles for me, most of the, let me just say, in Michigan, before I go there, who knows what a power of attorney is? Okay, everybody's got some experience with power of attorney, right? You're giving over some authority to somebody else. Very, very simple definition, right? You're giving some authority to someone else to sign on your behalf, right? In Michigan, unless a trust specifically allows for a trustee to give power of attorney, and explicitly has to say, and by the way, in legalese, right, we can do this in this trust. If it doesn't state that it can do that, meaning give over the trustee's authority by power of attorney to someone else who's not listed in the trust, unless it specifically says it can do that, it cannot do that. So why is that important? Keep in the back of your minds, relatives to trusts and certificate of trusts, that if you're dealing with successor trustees or the second generation or third generation of a particular trust document, a lot of people have this general understanding of what a power of attorney is and does, and they'll think, somebody might even suggest to them, oh, just get power of attorney, because the trustee, the daughter trustee now lives in Washington. Okay? Just be mindful of the fact that unless it specifically states that it can do it, that's not an option when there's a trust. So it puts that much more importance back on the certificate of trust, what the document actually says, and who actually has authority. Now, most of the time, trusts will have several, we'll call it generations, meaning there's the grantor, right, and then there's the successor trustee or co-successor trustee, and then another successor trustee. So generally, the original document will give us some options there, and hopefully one of them is local, right, and they can give that. One other thing I want to mention about the trust too is sometimes we'll get a certificate of trust, and the grantor is unable or unwilling to participate and basically subrogates his authority to the next person or the successor trustee. In those cases, many times we'll ask for an acknowledgement of that. So John Smith is as trustee of the John Family Smith or Family Smith Trust, Smith Family Trust, you know, is not going to act as trustee and is going to engage the successor trustee, and then the successor trustee accepts that responsibility. Sometimes those are documents that the attorney will send along with the trust, okay? And that's maybe, I don't know, less than half the time. Would you say, Bets or Katie? I mean, it doesn't happen a ton, but sometimes they'll need to have the acknowledgement aspect of that, not just. But frankly, many times it can be articulated in the certificate of trust, and that will fly. So that's as deep as I'm going to go into that. Any other questions though on certificates of trust?
So just basically, the more detail there is in it for what you want to do for the purpose of what you're doing, the better. Not that you want to go on forever and ever, not extra information, but just so that it explains it.
Yep.
Like 1 through 5 and list 1, 2, 3, 4, not list.
Yep. No, it'll expressly state who the grantor of the trust is and what or was, who the successor trustees are, and what their authorities are. Right. It'll be very much boilerplate. But you guys don't necessarily have to become the experts on is every item under the law included in this or not, because most of the time it's just going to happen properly because everybody, meaning the attorneys who prepare them and the title companies who review them, are just used to seeing them.
Okay.
So what I want you guys to really take away on certificate of trusts is if you see a trust, you know there's going to be one. You can get out ahead of that and ask for it. Be familiar with the concepts between trustees and successor trustees. the relationship there, and then the importance of that in most cases, they're not going to be able to give that power or authority that's been designated to them as a trustee or a successor trustee to someone else by power of attorney. And man, I bet I've been asked that question 4 times in the last 2 months. And then I'll never be asked it again for 6 months, and then it'll come back up all the time. It's just weird how that works. So those are the most important points, okay? All right, so this commitment, man, this is really pushing the limits of your expertise, or your service and our expertise, but we're gonna run through it. You might get this commitment in real life and be like, I don't want this property. But number 14 is provide Lighthouse with an appropriate land division approval from the Township of Manistee.
What?
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? We have a land split, and a divorce, and a trust, and a death threat. So anybody been involved in land splits? Done some deals? Okay, all right. So you don't have to be expert in everything, right? But understanding that if a title agent in a commitment is requesting a land split, you probably are going to know about this already because your seller's going to have had the conversation with you, like, yeah, we own 40, but we're selling 10, and you have that, so you probably would know about this. But again, kind of like a divorce isn't final until the judgment of divorce is issued. Land splits. Your land that you're selling, if it's a split, doesn't really exist until the split application has been processed properly, and that's been approved and it's been surveyed, right? And so if you have something like that, lean on your title folks. We can help you through that process, but generally speaking, in this case, this is meant to tell you and to tell who's ever reading this commitment, we've got a new parcel that hasn't been completely identified yet. So not only do we want to make sure that it's been appropriately split, legally split, first of all, appropriately split, right? What other areas, what other things might you begin thinking about that would be important to your client relative to a land split, or to the new buyer who's buying a split piece of land? Anybody, what kinds of things might they be concerned with?
Making sure they get the right piece.
The right piece, that it's described properly. Zoning, can I do with this parcel what I think I want to do with this parcel, meaning build or recreate or right on it, or
Lot
whatever,
lines.
farm it. Lot lines, right? So we're going to be dealing with things like surveys. What?
Taxes.
Taxes was the other thing that I really wanted to bring your attention to. So our municipalities are going to get their pound of flesh, right, out of our real estate that we own. And so so the treasurer and the assessor are a point of process throughout the land split, right? And so if the full parcel is 40 acres and the taxes are $1,000, I'll just keep it simple here, right? And they're buying half of that, 20 acres, right? It might be split at the township, it might be approved, you might even have a parcel number, right? But you probably don't have a current tax bill yet, right? And so that's something that we're going to want to be mindful of as well. So you don't have to become experts in the split process. Lean on our title folks to help you make sure that it's happening properly and we've got all the right pieces in place. But if you're on the buyer side, you really want to make sure, or the seller side for that matter, you really want to make sure that everybody understands what the property tax implications are going forward. And guess what? Many times we're going to close this transaction and we're going to guess. I hate to say that word. It's going to be an educated guess, but we're going to estimate what the property taxes are, do our proration as best as we can, and then everybody's going to essentially agree to, they are what they are in the future, but we're prorating them as best as we can.
I will
Itchy.
say one thing about prorations is sometimes we will not prorate on a new split, especially if it's a large piece of land and there's a home already on it, because that taxable value is going to be considered based on that larger parcel with the property. So if you're splitting it and there's a vacant lot that you're selling off, we can't really estimate it. So if you want prorations to be done and there's no new taxable value for that new lot, we always, or at least I always tell the clients, they have to come to an agreement with both buyers and sellers with what they want prorated or nothing gets prorated, and they'll just have to seller's responsible for that year on the larger parcel, and then you just take on the new tax bill the following year.
Is everyone following that logic?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes there would be, essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes there might be no proration, and your buyer just gets his tax bill 9 months later when the new tax bill is assessed, and he gets it and pays it, whatever it is, right? But the seller would pay all current taxes on that parcel, and the parent parcel, which includes your split parcel.
Yeah, because it's hard for us to estimate sometimes on those splits with a parent parcel.
The other important thing that Kathleen said is sometimes you might have one of the parties saying, like the seller, many times, I want something, I'm not paying his taxes, right? So then at that point, if there's no way for us to really, according to what KG was saying, then we might say to you, okay, can you negotiate with the other side of the transaction? Tell us what you think is fair, and maybe you put it in an addendum or something like that.
Because I have done that.
Go ahead, Sue.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, I sell a piece of property that was split in November of this year. I close it November 15th. The December 1 tax bill's coming out on the entire parcel, not just the split, because if I understand it correctly, the assessor's not gonna split those properties till March.
Yeah.
So it's in,
Yeah.
so whether you close in June or November, those tax bills that come out for that initial period are gonna be on the whole property.
Yeah.
Not
That's
just
probably
the split.
80% of the time, yes, you're right.
So, bottom line is that if you, you're not gonna have an adjusted tax bill till the following year in July, which means you could have the whole tax bill a lien on your little piece if the seller doesn't pay it.
Right. Yep. Which is why, in the commitment, all the taxes have to be brought current.
But then you have that bill that comes after the closing.
Yeah, so say you close in
Right.
June,
Right.
and there's a split on the property and that larger parcel.
Oh, yes,
still
I'm sorry, I see
has
what you're
that
saying,
December
yes.
bill that has to be paid. And so that can become a tax lien if the person doesn't pay. Like, I've seen it before, but typically we've been able
So you
to
really
clear it,
have to
but
deal with it at the closing table,
Yeah.
cause your buyer can get backdoored real easy.
It's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Everybody understand how that could impact?
So if your buyer is going, if the seller agrees to pay all the tax, just make sure that you're letting your buyer know, like next year, your payment's going up, because the taxes will be included in escrow there, or they're not in those initial payments. So don't let your buyer get caught unaware 2, 3, 6 months later, where all of a sudden they get a couple $100 a month added onto their tax bill.
And make sure that the upcoming taxes, which are not currently a lien for the year you're in,
Right.
are addressed in that closing. Because otherwise, your buyer could end up on the hook for the entire parcel.
well, the seller will still be on the hook, it'll just be a partial, like a lien on theirs, but the seller's still gonna be the responsible party, cause it's gonna be on the parent parcel.
Correct, but if you're getting a mortgage,
Well, yeah,
the mortgage now goes into default because the taxes aren't paid. So,
some I guess it depends on
yeah,
municipalities.
you know, you just have to think it through carefully.
Yeah.
And you guys, you know, you can talk to me, it's not like we can't figure something out. But you gotta deal with the taxes at that closing table. And don't trust that all people are good and are gonna do the right things. Cause there's the 10% in every profession that are crooked.
Sure. So we're talking about land splits. We need a land division approval, right? 15 is record with the Register of Deeds a certified copy of the survey from a registered land surveyor, right? So anytime there's a split, it's a really good idea to record a copy of the survey. Some townships will say, Sue, if you own the parent parcel and you're splitting the property, getting prepared to sell it, they'll say, okay, give me your application, give me the survey, pay my application fee, right now it's approved. and they'll say, okay, now Sue, make a warranty deed from yourself to yourself for that new legal description. Sometimes they'll even ask for that because they want that parcel of record as soon as possible. And here's an important note. If you're helping somebody do this, or if somebody's asking you about this, something that you can do to increase your value with this information, let them know that in the application approval, tell them to read that carefully, because sometimes their split is conditional upon these things, right? Pay the fee, get a survey, record a survey, and record a deed. And that's something that you wouldn't want to get caught up with. Now, the townships generally are going to be pretty good about that, if it's not within 90 days or 60 days or whatever. But you know, technically they could be like, start from scratch again, right? But it's just something to be aware of. Now, they want to see that of record. They want that new parcel to be of record and to have a public, sort of a historical documentation, public recognition of the fact that this parcel is now a separate property. So even in the case if Sue were to do a deed from herself to herself, now she's got that separate parcel. Guess what? That's an insurable deed transfer that we can go straight from too. So if all the land split was done ahead of time, and in our hypothetical Sue did that, that's actually our point of good title in many cases. And we can dispense with needing any of the back split stuff because we know that it was done right. Just a little bit of information there for you. Okay, and then on to 16. This is something you're going to see a lot of in most of your commitments, because most people who have a home have a mortgage, at least for some period of time in their ownership, right? So this is a standard requirement, standard language requirement that you'll see that will be very familiar to you, right? You're going to see in there, hey, I'm working with the buyer, and the seller has one mortgage or two mortgages, right? So 16 is recorded discharge between Mr. Big Bird as mortgager, and it gives a lot of information about the recorded stuff, right? None of that really matters to you guys. Release of lien or release of recorded discharge, that's what we care most about for you. 17 just shows that there's another mortgage on there. Something else I want to point out is that might be helpful for you, or at least point out, again, your expertise in the process to your clients. Remember, who can remember from Schedule A? Flip back to the very first page, and we're going to come back to this one, so keep your finger there. Who can tell me what part of Schedule A is the owner of the current owner of the property?
Number 4.
Number 4, great, okay? So if the mortgages that you see, now flip back to our page we were just on, if you saw 16 and 17, and you saw that there was somebody with a mortgage, you saw a name there that was not the current mortgage, or not the current owner, that's a little bit of a problem, right? Because why would the title company ask for a discharge of a mortgage who's not the current owner?
Because they were still left on it.
Or how could that even happen? Yeah, who said that?
Because they were still left on it.
Yeah, right. Has anyone ever had this happen? Happens a lot. Happens a lot. Guess what? Little known fact, banks and mortgage companies and servicing entities, they don't record stuff frequently and accurately, and they're supposed to, right? But man, I'm seeing all our staff in the back going, because we see it all the time. So you'll see that a lot. Okay, you'll see that where you're representing the seller, and Mr. and Mrs. Jones are in title, and then you get the requirement for, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's mortgage from 17 years ago needs to be discharged, right? So that's what's going on there. Something didn't get recorded properly or discharged properly, right? And that's what we're looking for there. Occasionally it can be worse than that, all right? Just a missing register of a missing document. But you know, lean on your title folks for those types of things, for the better explanation. Oh, I see this mortgage is still out there that doesn't belong to my seller. You know, can you get that? I mean, that's who they bought it from. It's been 15 years. You know, do we really need it? Right? Start talking with them about that, and they can help you through those situations, because the answers as to why that's still undischarged are a lot. There's just a lot of different situations on how and why that might happen. So I just wanted to point that out, 16 and 17. The 16, I think, is an example of Yeah, that's, Mr. Big Bird, he's not even in title anymore, but his mortgage is still hanging out there, okay? We'll flip into 18. Oh my gosh, this property just gets worse, you guys. I would run from this listing if this was your preliminary.
Yeah.
Including at 1:30.
Okay, thanks very much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
So not only is that everything else this property's dealing with, but it's got some tax liens that are recorded. And so we're looking for a discharge. Anybody had this happen in real life? Property tax liens? It happens. Death and taxes, right? That's what somebody said, we're waiting us at some point. Recorded discharge of a Michigan tax lien in a stated amount of $25,000 against Elmo Monster. Now, this could be anybody. This could be anybody's name, right? So, just again, something for you to keep in mind. This is really important. You see a tax lien on a property, IRS or the state of Michigan,
That's for
we gotta deal with them.
number one.
What's that?
They're number one.
Yeah, and it could, and this could be news to your seller if you're on the on the listing side, right? I mean, you just don't know. But again, you're gonna get this commitment, and you're gonna be able to look at it and sit down with your seller and really make some good sense, and it helps them anticipate some of these things. Again, demonstrating your value to them. And of course, if you have questions, right, that's where you lean on us, so we can demonstrate our value back to you and to your client as well. Tax liens, though, got to be dealt with, right? So that's where you would be like, okay, this is my seller, right? And then we know who to go to. Or it's not if it's your seller, many times we can get a payoff and take care of it at closing. Or maybe they've got a payment order from the IRS, a payment agreement in there, and they might provide that to you, which you could get to our closers. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe it's been, or maybe they're like, oh my gosh, that was settled 8 years ago. They haven't recorded a discharge. Happens, right? So at that point, whatever you find out, lean back on your closer. Reach back out to them and give them the information, whatever your seller tells you, and then they can many times work out, call the state, get a discharge, find that it was misposted. Maybe your seller gives you a discharge. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to record this. I thought they were, something like that. If it's not your seller, right, then we've got a different problem on our hands. That's a totally different problem. And again, your best course of action at that point is if our client, if Bets or Kathleen hasn't already called you, you're going to call them. You're like, okay, how do we deal with this? This isn't even a person in title anymore. What does that mean? Okay, and those things stick around like a bad penny. Liens go on property. People gain interest in properties through all kinds of interesting ways. And if there's tax liens or recorded judgments that are called levies, like if somebody's got a lost in a lawsuit and their property gets tagged, man, anything they own, right, that lien gets attached to. So weird things like that can happen.
Construction.
Pardon me?
Construction.
Yep, yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. So 20 is, now we're getting into the proactive aspects of our closing, right? So now, hey, we want to see a mortgage recorded from the buyers to their chosen lender, right? So that's going to be something you'll see a lot of. Nothing for you to do, no matter what side you're on at this point. You're just looking at that going, well, of course, yeah, they're going to get a mortgage, and that's got to get recorded in order for the title company to close and insure. And then, oh, look at this one. Wait a minute, I didn't know we were dealing with a manufactured home. Anybody deal with manufactured homes?
Now, I understand if a manufactured home has been secured to land for 15 years, you no longer have to deal with the title issues.
You are partially correct, except for your time frame. If a mobile home has been affixed to dirt, to real property, and there is what's called an affidavit of a fixture recorded, that could be 1 day after. There's no time limit. If that affidavit of fixture is recorded, that tells us all that it's no longer a mobile home. It's part of the real property, and the green title that goes along with the mobile home is forfeited. So it doesn't exist anymore. So it's now part of the real property, and goes along with lot 6 of, or meets and bounds description of.
So, I ran into this a year ago,
Okay.
or 2 years ago. And I had 2 different title people. And I had to file for the lost title and clear the liens and all that.
Yeah,
House next door, I'm working on, and the gal says, well, it's been there 15 years. The state says after 15 years, you don't have to get the affidavit. You don't have to do all the filing you did.
Oh, so you're saying
I
the
was about ready
time-
to kill somebody.
so you're saying this, the state has a time frame after which you no longer have to do the affidavit? You
Correct.
no longer have to deal with the mobile home aspects of it?
Correct.
So what do they use, who's certifying that that the skirt's been removed, the axle's been removed, the tires are gone, and that it's actually attached to the property? Nobody?
I can't answer that.
Yeah, so so I don't know the answer to that either, Sue, but that's our concern as a title insurer. So the reason we're gonna look for that affidavit of a vendor is that becomes the confidence that we have in order to treat it as real property and insure. More importantly though, the lender, assuming there's gonna be a lender on the property, that's the confidence that they need in order to give a mortgage on that property, because they don't wanna give a mortgage on a property and have the house hauled away. Kinda changes their perspective a little bit towards their security in the property. So that's really what's at issue here, is the security and the confidence that the lender and the title insurer have on that property, and of course, the parties involved, right? So I'll have to look into that 15-year clause. That's pretty interesting. I did not know
Because I
that.
had two in the exact same situation. One I went through 2 months of agony,
Yes.
clearing, and the other one, boom. And I was just seething.
So here's what I would
The
say,
extra work I did.
for the benefit of all of us here, without going too far in the weeds, if you want to do a listing or a sale on a mobile home, some things you want to get to right away are, is it a fixed? Meaning, have the wheels been removed? Is it now part of the real property? Right? Has there been has that actually happened at the Register of Deeds, or has it just physically happened on site? Right? Because those are some things that we're going to assess. And then, is there a title? If there is a title, who's got it? Who's on it? And Sue brought up a very important part. Is there a lien on the title? That's another piece that kind of gets in the weeds a little bit. So those would be the things. I'll stop it there, because we could do a whole training on that, right? There's so many weird things that could go on with mobile
So
homes.
stupid people question.
That's what you want to look for.
Yeah, stupid people question. I am now licensed to sell manufactured homes.
Thanks, guys.
So I can do
Appreciate
it
you.
in a park. We don't go through title on those, do we?
No.
We're just transferring the license with the state of Michigan like a car.
Yep. And in those cases, you'll need to somehow work with some kind of a settlement statement. Do you have a point of sale system or some kind of a settlement statement or receipt or something to work
I
with them?
can always make that happen.
Yeah, you'd have to kind of create that process, and you can charge for it. I mean, you probably have already thought about this.
Well, that's why I got the license, so that we can, because we're starting to see them on MLS,
Yes.
because prices got so high now.
Yes. It's becoming the affordable housing. That's what
Yeah.
a lot of people can begin to afford, and so the demand is going to intensify for that. So as usual, Sue's ahead of the curve. She's got her license already. Love it. Yeah, but that is that's a non-Dave title. That's a non-title matter. We can't really help you there, and you don't need anything. You don't need any additional costs associated with that either. You can't even get it. Great questions. Okay. Let's see what else we have. So the mortgage, the manufactured housing. Okay, and then in this particular case, this 22 is a furthering of what we've just been talking about. I actually got a little ahead of myself. So we've talked about the fixture of the affidavit of a fixture. We've talked about the release and termination of liens. This is just standard title requirement language. If you see 21, you're going to see 22 on there as well. It's kind of like the certificate of trust, where you got that bunch of legalese and stuff below it. And then the last thing that we've got included on this, oh my gosh, this property has also been foreclosed. Back to your question about that. So record a redemption certificate for taxes. This is a little bit different than your question. I apologize. So this is a tax foreclosure, different than what Hakan was asking about earlier. So this guy apparently hadn't paid his taxes And so the treasurer did a tax deed, sold his taxes, and the only way we can get rid of that lien is through what's called a redemption certificate.
So, I'm sorry, I just have a question. The city or township or whatever sold,
The county treasurer,
sold the taxes to some entity like a bank or whomever.
probably a private individual or an entity, paid them.
Okay.
Yep, someone else paid them. And then eventually what would happen, and I'm not an expert in this area, but eventually, the tax foreclosure laws, I don't understand completely in Michigan, but if you don't, if a property owner doesn't pay his taxes, they can be sold. Somebody else can pay those taxes, and they'll either end up with interest on their money, which eventually they'll be paid by somebody who buys the property and pays the taxes, or after a certain period of time and payment of taxes, they'll perfect title in that deed, in themselves, through the payment of those back taxes. That's about the extent of my understanding of that. I don't exactly know how that works, and I think that process has even changed some in the last 5 to 10 years
There's
with
a
all the
sale.
land banks.
Yeah.
There's a sale that goes on, I believe, between July and September.
A tax sale, a property tax sale.
But in some other states where you pay for the taxes that are delinquent after like a certain amount of years, you take interest upon property.
Yeah, so many people who invest in that or who play in that sandbox, they're doing it for interest on their money or to get the property or both.
And I bet you that stuff has changed since 2008 and 9.
There have been a lot of changes, yeah, and I've just spoken about as much expertise as I have in that area. But when we see it in title, what we've seen on records are a county tax deed from the county of Kent to Dave Nichols for $3,200, right, because I paid those taxes. That can be redeemed by the property owner. If they sell that property in a certain period of time, I think it's within 4 years, we can go pay those taxes with interest, and the county treasurer will provide us, upon the payment of those taxes, a redemption certificate, or a certificate of redemption, and then we'll record that along with the new deed. And that's how that particular lien can be effectively dealt with.
So do prospective owners or, whatever down the road, do they just look on records to see who has paid their taxes?
Yes. Yeah, and they'll show up in the delinquent tax section.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. If you flip to the next one, Schedule B is continued, and what you'll see on Schedule B are whether or not the owner of record is current on taxes or not. And in this case, because we've put everything, including the kitchen sink, into this particular property for the sake of learning, yeah.
There's nothing left.
Be no surprise, they didn't pay their taxes either. So what Kathleen and Betsy will be doing is contacting, again, this is something just for you to know, not anything for you to do, but know as your realtor, the closing company, the closing agent is going to be contacting the treasurer, getting updated taxes, or should be getting updated taxes through past our closing date, right? We're going to put those on there, and you guys have already dealt in your purchase agreement in the tax portion of that, property tax portion, who's paying back taxes, and 99.9% of the time, the seller's going to pay those back taxes. And so these would all be updated and listed on your settlement statement and paid at closing. Again, just something for you to be mindful of, like, oh, we've got some taxes that are going to be happening, right? So if you start getting versions of the settlement statement and it doesn't have taxes on there, right? Just helping you kind of put some two and two together to improve your level of expertise with your client and catch some of that stuff, because things can get missed, things happen, right? So again, that's just something that you're going to see in commitments. Majority of what you might see a current tax bill, maybe a prior tax bill, but okay. And I'm going to just encapsulate because I've hit my time, and we're only capable of absorbing so much after a while, right? That's Schedule A and Schedule B Part 1. That's the requirements, which is our to-do list, yours and my to-do list, and a lot of very specific things, title issues that pop up, and how we're going to deal with them. Schedule B Part 2 is not anything you need to be overly concerned with, but I'm going to encapsulate the entire B2 section with a couple of statements. Number one is, it lists the exceptions to the policy. So everything you see on there is a non-covered item relative to the property, okay? So if you look at a commitment and you see something on there, and I would encourage you to take a look at some of your past deals just to get familiar with this, or look at them in the future. Take a look in there and read through them. They're gonna be very plain language for the most part. There's not a lot of legalese in there. And just familiarize yourself with what's covered and what's not covered. Because people make, I'm gonna say people, consumers, most of us who don't do title for a living, we assume that one of two things: title insurance, everything's covered, or title insurance, they don't do anything, nothing's covered, it's a big old racket anyway, right? Our consumers kind of have one or sort of this other misunderstanding, if you will. And what you see on Schedule B, Part 2 exceptions are things that are not going to be covered, right? So if you see something on there like an easement to a neighbor, right? As a realtor, you're going to heighten your value to your client by knowing that and understanding that exception relative to the property. Maybe they've said to you, man, I love these backwoods here, this is so beautiful. Hey, what's that little dirt road for? Oh, that's how my neighbor crosses my property and gets to his. Oh, I don't know what that little road for is back there. We're going to close it off and build the kid's fort back there, right? All of a sudden you're like, hang on, right? That could be, that's going to make you guys so much more valuable to your client to understand. You start seeing stuff like that, right? You're going to see things on there like consumer powers easements. Okay, they're there. You are not going to change them. I'm not going to change them. Your client's saying, that's not going to really change them much. But again, it's something just to be familiar with. But access easements, or if you see oil and gas easements on there, those are always going to show up as exceptions to the property, right? So again, maybe take a look at that. If it's a 100-acre parcel and there's an oil and gas lease on it, maybe not as big of a deal to your buyer. Maybe mention it to him. Maybe get the original document from the title company. Can you tell me where that's at on this property? Because he wants to build a house. You see how some of that stuff could start to impact the enjoyment and the use of the property. And who are they going to come back to first? If they realize that there's a gas line going under where they want to put their pole barn, right? So, just want to be helpful to you in that area. Yeah.
So would you suggest us to go to the Register of Deeds before, for every listing that we have to?
Look at your
No,
title.
no, look at your exceptions, review your title. If you see something on there, first call should be to one of our staff people to help get a better explanation. Is this something I need to be considerate of or not? Like, is this something that could make a difference to my seller? And we'll look at it. Say, well, you know what, and we might even make a decision proactively with you. For example, our examiners are trained to accept oil and gas leases. We just accept them because it's such a weird phenomenon in certain areas of our state, particularly north and south of Grand Rapids. A lot in Allegan County, a lot up in Macomb County. Many times we'll look at them. If you ask about them or object to them, we'll take a deeper look, a deeper dive into it, and go, you know what? This actually is from 1976, and it's on 650 acres. And there's no oil and gas wells that are anywhere near your property, right, based on whatever. We might be able to discern some of that stuff and be like, yeah, we'll remove that. And then once we remove an exception, guess what? It becomes a covered item. Okay? All right. I'll hang around a little bit, but I'm going to officially end it there because I've given you a lot of information.
Thank you. Wonderful. We really needed that badly.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.